Hi everyone, my name is Ketan Nilangekar. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ThreatWatch. Welcome to our webinar. Today we are going to talk about proactive ransomware detection and prevention and how we can do that without using any EDR and get better cyber hygiene for your cloud, for your environments, and prevent these attacks before they can manifest. I'll just start in a minute. I'm just giving folks to join in and we'll begin just momentarily. Thank you. So again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining in to our webinar. So today we are going to talk about proactive ransomware prevention and a better cyber hygiene without using EDR. My name is Ketan Nilangekar and I'm the CEO and co-founder of ThreatWatch. So in one of our previous webinars, we have talked about the ideal situation in cyber hygiene, in vulnerability management, which is reduced backlog and workload and better cyber hygiene overall, which leads to improved cybersecurity posture and allows you to mitigate a lot of the critical threats. We call it the proactive security nirvana. And the way it works, as we have seen, is despite the fact that you might have a lot of vulnerability noise out there, if you're prioritizing and filtering it in the appropriate manner, you might be able to whittle down the workload to a much more manageable number, which you then just focus on and remediate. So in this scenario, we found that even though there might be tens of thousands of vulnerabilities that are disclosed, a lot of them might actually be identified on your systems. Ultimately, it just boils down to a few handful of weaponized vulnerabilities that really might be affecting your systems, which you need to take care of. We also looked at the entire picture of malware versus CVEs over the last 2 years and the correlation between them. And this correlation is very important because that gives you a way of identifying which vulnerabilities are the most important for you to really take action on. And as you can see, over the past 2 years, there's couple of hundred weaponized CVEs that we have identified. There are a whole bunch of malware associated with them. So, and not all of them obviously are have CV vectors on them. They might have other vectors also. But for the most part, if we are able to focus our attention on these weaponized CVs, we might get a big return on investment on our vulnerability management programs. Within these few hundred vulnerabilities that are weaponized, there are also some interesting takeaways in terms of what the scoring, the CVS scoring shows up. And we know that a lot of the CVs, a majority of the CVs along with them, have CVS scores which are less than urgent. So they typically fall through the cracks. And those are the ones that we have to sort of monitor and check for their status, for their life cycle, over their life cycle, and remediate at the right time. So today we are going to talk about this angle of how to remediate or how to identify these early in the life cycle and prevent them, rather than waiting for the cure, waiting for your EDR tools, your endpoint detection tools to kick in and identify when the attack has already happened or is in progress. So we all know the old maxim that prevention is better than the cure. So if we can actually identify these CVs, these vulnerabilities early and mitigate them, which is possible in almost all the cases, we might be in a better position to address this issue at its root rather than waiting for things to go back. So this is an example we looked at earlier of a CVSS 4 vulnerability, which is a low score. Usually would not show up on any particular vulnerability management radar as something urgent. But if you see, it has gone through its life cycle, it has evolved, and there have been exploits published. There have been weaponizations of this particular CV. And if you see within the space of around 6 to 8 months, we've seen the vulnerability going from just a CVSS score 4 to a weaponized vulnerability through the Mirai or Shellbot malware. So the idea here is to sort of shrink this window of opportunity, the 6-month window that the attackers typically have, because we have ignored this CV based on CVSS score. And the idea is to shrink this as much as possible and patch this early. So let's look at the ransomware activity over the past year. Now, this is specifically ransomware type malware, which we are not talking about the general malware universe here. Over just the past year, we have identified 11 weaponized CVs, 91 individual malwares, and affecting, as you can see, a whole bunch of countries and industries that have been targeted here. So it's the number 11 that we are focusing on here is what is interesting, which is not a very high number if you look at it. But we need to identify them early in their timeline and do mitigations at that time. So again, the same point comes up about the CVSS score. Majority of the CVs, the 11 CVs, have a CVSS score which is less than urgent. So they will not naturally pop up in one of your vulnerability management radars. So we have to be careful about that. Along with that, we can also look at the cost or the damage associated with ransomware, which is actually growing significantly. In 2019, the average cost of ransomware attack was somewhere around $133,000, which is pretty significant. And if you see that the growth in this sort of activity, in this sort of cybercrime is projected to touch $20 billion by 2021. So this is a significant problem, as we all know. And if you think about it, this ransomware, the word itself just entered our lexicon in the past few years. Before that, we didn't know about this. But as these things evolve fast, we have to keep pace with it, and we have to have solutions which can address this issue better and ahead of the game, rather than again wait for the ransomware attack to actually happen. So let's look at the life cycle of a cyber threat, right? I mean, here we are just trying to lay out a few examples of what the timelines could be and where the possible mitigations could come in and what we could do in order to mitigate attacks like this. So let's look at the BlueKeep vulnerability, which is CV 2019-0708. Microsoft RDP, remote code execution, pretty serious. It was disclosed on May 14th by Microsoft, published pretty early, I would say, by NVD standards on May 16th itself. And it was assessed very early on for its severity, etc. So it was up on the radar. Patches came in very shortly from Microsoft as well. Other vendors started reporting this issue, but research tells us that there was a lot of unpatched systems out there, and we attribute this primarily to the lack of priority on this. And yes, there are a lot of vulnerabilities especially with remote connection sort of products, which don't get proper prioritization, don't get the attention that they need. But once we started getting the exploits, the reports of exploits and dark web activity, things start to get serious. So now we have to now we are going into the area of weaponization of these potential weaponization, and that's when we have to start tracking this even more seriously. So it was November, so between May and November there was a lot of activity. In November there was a first sighting of some sort of exploit, and in June, as late as June 2020, we found a report of this malware called Invisible, which was indicated as the first weaponized, officially weaponized version of this particular CV. So you can see that there is a significant amount of time that was available for us to identify and to sort of patch this threat. And there's a lot of time that this threat was actually latent and lying dormant sort of, and no activity was happening on it. Ultimately, just recently in October 2020, NSA has named this as one of the top 25 most active weaponized CVs, which are being used in various malware. So if you can see that the timeline is very exaggerated, but there were enough opportunities for teams and individuals to patch this vulnerability early, since the patches were available very early as well. So one takeaway from this is obviously that the threats such as these might be latent for a very long time. So that is one thing that we have to track, and that's the reason why we have to track the life cycle of these threats. Another example could be a similar vulnerability in Atlassian. This is in the Confluence product, which was published way back in March 2019. Again, a remote code execution, very popular with hackers for their initial attacks. So around April, we notice exploits and dark web activity. Again, in May, over a period of 2 or 3 months, we started looking at weaponization reports, cryptojacking toolkits, ransomware, and Trojans that started appearing around this. And this was a very trivial vulnerability to exploit. So you can see that the timeline again here was condensed, because attackers typically go after the low-hanging fruit in terms of getting access to systems. So similar thing happened. There are still reports of weaponization and malware attacks related to this vulnerability, because there is not enough priority in terms of patching this, and there are unpatched Confluence systems which are exposed, which might still be vulnerable. And that's the reason why NSA has named this vulnerability again in the top 25 list of theirs. So another takeaway from this is the timeline and the point at which these vulnerabilities get weaponized is very critical, and that is something that we should actively be able to track. And there is a whole lot of automation that is also required, because you have this continuous storm of vulnerabilities that is coming in. So filtering and tracking this automatically is obviously going to be very important. So just to condense all the learnings from the few examples that we just saw, obviously the CVSS score, the score that comes from NVD, which is just the severity of the issue, is not enough. It's not a good indicator of weaponization. It doesn't tell you when these issues might get weaponized or what the timelines might be. It's a good first start. It's a good, easy way to start a prioritization, but it should not be the only one that you rely on. Prioritization should take into consideration other lifecycle events as well. And we should track lower priority CVSS score vulnerabilities as well. The second, obviously, we saw that these threats evolve, or they have a lifespan, they have a timeline. So They need to be tracked over their life cycle rather than just point in time scans or mitigation. So they need to be addressed on an ongoing basis. We also realize that there is room for AI here to come in and do exploit prediction and malware prediction for us based on what the reports might be. So just the way humans are going to analyze vulnerabilities and predict or be able to say how easy or how difficult this vulnerability might be for exploits. Machines can help us there by predicting at least the probability or the chance of these things getting exploited. And in this case, the BlueKeep vulnerability was actually predicted to 95% be likely of an exploit, which was very close to what actually happened in the real world. The other point is about relationship between the vulnerabilities and the threats. Now, this correlation is very important because that ultimately helps you get the signals about the active weaponization and malware that are coming out. So that lends itself into how you will do the prioritization. So this correlation between threats and vulnerabilities has to be automated, has to be continuous and ongoing, and potentially in real time, so that we can isolate the most damaging vulnerabilities early. And final, last but not the least, I think continuous monitoring of your attack surface as well as the threat landscape. So both things are evolving, both the universes are evolving. Your attack surface is changing and the threat landscape is also evolving. So continuously monitoring and correlating them potentially without scans is also a must. So let's look at how we can actually do this. What are the things that we need here? So obviously, we talked about the threat intelligence piece. We know we need early warnings on vulnerabilities, exploits, malware, patches, dark web activity, social media references, which tells you how serious, how severe the issue is and what people are talking about it. All these things can go into the threat intelligence aspect of the puzzle. And this needs to be real time. This needs to be highly assisted by AI or automated to the extent that it can, so that we get this information in real time, because this is what attackers are depending on also. So this is what attackers are following. This is what this is the information that they will be using against you. So we need to get this information before they can. The second piece obviously is prediction. That this is where AI comes in. And again, AI here is the means to an end. We need to use it in the appropriate manner to predict exploits, to predict the CVSS scores, to predict the weaknesses or weakness types of a particular vulnerability, and generate this sort of graph of how things are going to evolve in going forward into the future. So that's where AI comes in. And finally, we need sort of this mechanism to continuously assess this information or check this information against our attack surface. So there, your typical scanning won't work because it's very tedious. It requires you to go over the networks. It requires you to have agents all over the place. So we need a mechanism to sort of do this passively, offline as much as possible without going over the network, with low impact, low touch. And we also need all these signals to be prioritized, because it's just not going to help us if we are generating these signals without active inputs from the malware side or active correlation with the threats. So that also has to happen in terms of continuous assessment. So once we have these three pieces together, let's look at the BlueKeep vulnerability one more time and see what we could have done here, or what could have been our response to this in terms of early malware or early ransomware detection. So we know that this report was available from Microsoft as early as May of 2019. So ideally, whenever the patches are out or whenever the reports are out, we should be tracking these vulnerabilities, right? There should be an easy way for us to filter out the vulnerabilities that are, at least related to the infrastructure that you own. So if you're a Microsoft heavy user, then you should get, or you should have a way of easily tracking these high impact vulnerabilities or threats very early, as soon as they are reported. Now, again, when the advisories or patches are available from Microsoft, we need this lifecycle monitoring to continue, and we need to be able to predict how serious this issue is, whether patching is almost required in this case, or can be deferred. And here the exploit and malware prediction could come in. All the automated monitoring could come in and could help us in setting up the right priority for this thing. So there's always this tussle between, okay, the patches are available, but do I need to deploy them across my fleet? So one big indicator here would be the priority, which would say, yes, there is active chance of this threat getting exploited or getting weaponized very soon. So yes, the patches need to be deployed, and this is a serious issue, although there might not be any active threats or any active malware out there. So this could be an indicator for us to patch these systems at this point of time and potentially mitigate the threat for good at this stage. Now, if we are not able to get those signals, then again, the weaponization correlation with the threat reports, that is again going to significantly help us in mitigating this, because once we get report of an active malware, the priority of this particular patch or vulnerability has to be bubbled up significantly, so that we can then patch these, or then address these vulnerabilities, or put in the remediations as soon as possible. So again, here the question is, when should the patch be applied? Well, there is an active malware out there, so now is the time for you to sort of put in the remediation, at least at this point of time. So all these things, if they are done in an early manner, then you don't need to wait for the attack, or you don't need to rely entirely on your EDR solutions or EDR signals to tell you that there's an active attempt of this malware to come in. So if one of these vulnerabilities are, or if these patches are applied, then you're more likely to have mitigated the threat early in the cycle. And again, EDR is essential. We are not discounting the role of EDR in this process. EDR is essential in case some of these things come in through different vectors. But for the most part, if any one of the vulnerabilities are getting exploited in the course of this malware, then identifying them early and mitigating them will kill the chain of the attacker in terms of getting or even being able to exploit this. So that's what we recommend we should do. And ultimate learning here is obviously to not let the malware or ransomware affect your endpoints in the first place. If you follow these early detection and cyber hygiene, then your reliance on your endpoint detection is significantly reduced. So finally, we just take a look at the NSA Advisory, which just came in this month, in the context of what ThreatWatch can do here. And we realized that there were around 25 vulnerabilities that were named in this report. We have real-time coverage of all those 25 vulnerabilities with more than 1,000+ pieces of advisories and social and dark web references to go along with it. So we have more than adequate coverage of all of these vulnerabilities, and we are tracking them on a real-time basis. Curiously, 60% of these vulnerabilities have a CVSS score below 8, which further lends itself to our thesis that low priority vulnerabilities or low severity vulnerabilities, low CVSS score vulnerabilities are also equally actively exploited by malware and attackers. And finally, because of the power of AI, again, the AI assisted malware prediction or exploit prediction was able to at least do 50% accurate 50% coverage of all these threats that were out there, and we were able to predict exploits for more than half of these vulnerabilities ahead of time. So all this ties into the message that we are trying to convey here is you just don't need to rely on your EDR for malware prevention or ransomware prevention, but you can do an equally effective job of stopping these threats in their tracks very early on in this cycle. Any questions? So this was the presentation, guys. I hope this was useful to you. I'll take any questions if you have. We have people on the line who can answer your questions on chat as well. But I'll take any questions from you guys right now if you have. So thanks for joining in, guys. I'll keep the bridge open for a little bit longer in case you guys have any questions. And thank you for joining in. And we'll post a recording of this online pretty soon for your reference at a later time. And please feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is listed there at threatwatch.io, info@threatwatch.io. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.